The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. Hey guys, today we have on Rebecca Rettig, who is Chief Legal and Policy Officer at Polygon Labs. And we're going to talk all about regulation in crypto, and we're going to talk about Rebecca's time in front of Congress. We're going to talk about all regulation in crypto. So Rebecca, quickly introduce yourself and then we can dive in.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, as you said, I'm the Chief Legal and Policy Officer at Polygon Labs, but more relevant is I've been a lawyer in this space for a really, really long time, 7.5, 8 years. I started representing really small software development companies back in 2017. And a lot of what we now think of as like huge DeFi companies when they were sort of little baby companies. So I've been in the space and dealing with developers for a long time and thinking about like the policy stuff. And then maybe 5 years ago, when DeFi summer really hit and regulators wanted to know what it was, I was at Aave. And so people would come and say, like, can you explain like this tech to us? And so that's sort of got into policy work as a necessity. And here I am.
Awesome. Okay, well, we have to talk about your recent appearance in front of Congress. Can you tell us what I'm going to ask a lot of questions that I think people don't typically give lawyers and people who come on podcasts in the space, because I'm just genuinely curious, and maybe it even doesn't have so much to do with crypto as much as just how this is kind of set up. So what was the motivation for that hearing specifically? This was what, maybe like a month ago now?
Early September, so probably like 6-7 weeks ago.
So what was the motivation? So does Congress call in, they bring in experts like yourself and others in the space, and they ask you to explain, in this scenario, it was DeFi specifically?
Yeah, it was DeFi.
Okay.
So my understanding of why they did the hearing is like, right, we've seen lots of draft legislation and you've seen like lots of little references to DeFi in this draft legislation. And it's very, very atypical to have legislation on a topic when there's literally been 0 hearings on it, because, right, part of what Congress does is sort of fact-finding, education, and things like that before they actually jump into the legislative process. So I think the impetus for that hearing in particular was to say, listen, we've kickstarted this. All the legislation is doing studies and stuff, but we're serious that we need to look into this more.
Yeah. Okay. So I watched probably 3/4 of that live, and as somebody who's not very deep into most of this stuff is way beyond me in terms of my understanding of how, a bill becomes a law, not like trolling, but you know what I mean? So a lot of this stuff is like way beyond me. But when I watch these things, it is sort of fascinating. Well, first of all, the people, so they have like the Congress people, right? Like on like a bench, and they give allotted time to these people to speak.
Yeah.
Most of the time, and this doesn't just apply to crypto, this is in congressional hearings as a whole, but a lot of times it seems like these people just get up there and they just want to hear themselves talk for their 3 minutes. And I don't know that there's like a tremendous amount of actual, do you feel like these people are genuinely interested in what you have to say?
So I'll give the lawyer answer, which is it depends. But I would say some of them really are, right, who've dug in and who've thought about it. But I do think, especially on this topic, especially right now, people are coming to it with an agenda. Now, that isn't a bad thing, right? The agenda isn't like crypto bad, crypto good agenda always, right? You could see during the hearing, sometimes people are like, what are the use cases, DeFi and otherwise? That's a great question at an educational hearing. And some people who we're used to seeing be a little more skeptical of crypto played their typical parts and came with, certain hypotheticals to show why crypto, is used for legal purposes or things like that. So some people come with their own agenda, but that's not a bad thing. And I think some of them actually really do genuinely listen. I had a great back and forth with Rep. Bill Foster, who is, he's a scientist in his own right. And we actually have had productive conversations subsequent to the hearing. And so I would say I'm pretty impressed that people are open-minded and do listen to what you say. Not everybody, but definitely there are people who really genuinely want to know what's going on.
What do you think is still the biggest disconnect between legislators and government, and then DeFi crypto as a whole? Like, if you had to pinpoint a single disconnect in terms of like our understanding of the space and their understanding of the space, what do you think that is?
Um, Well, I generally don't like to blame one side or the other. So I do think there is a disconnect and everybody bears some blame. But coming from the industry, I don't think we've done ourselves favors as to our narratives, right? Yield and, all the self-referential stuff, points and tokens and things like that. One, it seems super esoteric, right? Very, very hard to know what we're actually talking about. And two, when we use words like wallet and exchange and money market and all of those things, all regulators here is, oh, well, this is the traditional financial system and you're evading the laws. Now it's not right, but I do think I wrote this op-ed years ago that said like language matters. And so when we use all these financial terms in DeFi, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And I think that's come to pass on the more decentralized crypto side of things. On the centralized crypto side, right, we kind of know what to do regulation wise. We've seen it before, right? It's just complicated because we don't typically regulate spot markets in the United States. So
yeah, I mean, we say we've done it before, but then obviously we had FTX and like a whole debacle there, which didn't paint a very good image of us.
yeah.
That it seemed like you were going to say. I guess one thing I would just say is like we seem to have some understanding of how to regulate the centralized side, but even there are catastrophes like FTX and that whole debacle. Although that was, I guess, offshore. So
That's
I don't
just
know.
right. Offshore, not the US regulated market, and fraud. Like fraud happens in the US too in completely regulated spaces as well. So I'm not sure that like regulation would have caught the fraud there. But what I mean is more, we know what kinds of like conflicts of interest walls you need to put in place and other types of controls you need to put in place for centralized actors.
Okay, that's reasonable. Okay, I have one last question on the congressional hearing thing. Do you think that these people, I keep saying these people like in a derogatory sense, but I mean like legislators, do you think that they feel that they are representing their constituents when they're saying, or like take somebody maybe for example who has a negative view of the space?
Mm-hmm.
What I often see, and now I'm just like giving my own perspective, so I'm putting that out there. But what I often see is like, sometimes I look at these legislators and they have like very strong views. Like I remember seeing Maxine Waters in that hearing, and it's like, I don't even know if her constituents like care that much, but she has a very strong opinion. Like, so I think that there's like the way that I see it is like maybe there's more adoption than we think in the United States. I'm not sure. It seems like Coinbase has done reports like, right, I don't know how accurate those are, but it seems like we have some numbers that show that Americans are adopting crypto at a fairly high rate. But like I look at how strongly she may have some opinions on some things, and I'm like, I don't think that the people that you're representing care like nearly to that extent. And if they do, they probably don't have that same opinion necessarily. Like it's almost self-selection for people who are keen on seeing the space progress forward. So do you feel that these people like keep saying these people? Do you feel like these legislators are on our side in that sense? It's sort of weird.
So there are two parts to this, right? So one, what a lot of legislators say is, I never hear from my constituents about crypto, ever. And so that's another mistake that we've made in the space, right? That we haven't been engaging. Now, some of that is because there have been really aggressive regulators. And so people, I think, especially entrepreneurs, people building small businesses and even just grassroots stuff, I think have been wary to engage even with their representatives, just knowing the regulatory side is out there. So there's that piece of it. I think the other thing is, if we're going to be real, that the legislative system is somewhat paternalistic. So if you're not hearing from your constituents over and over, you are going to impose your judgment on what is good for them. And so that's why it's actually really, like, not to be sort of cheesy about it, but this is why it's really important for crypto people to call their own representatives and talk about it and set up meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Coinbase has like pushed this, like reach out to your representative. But
yeah,
do you think that this actually makes a big impact? Like, I mean,
Mhm.
there's evidence of this, you think?
Yeah, so Coinbase has done a great job of staying with crypto. We also, in collaboration with Solana and the Wormhole Foundation, run these like crypto policy boot camps. They're meant to be these really small 25-person boot camps where you bring in like people to teach about policy, and you bring in Hill staffers and stuff like that to tell people like, here's how you reach out to your rep, here's what to expect. So I think there's a lot of efforts to do that. And I've heard anecdotes of people saying, listen, I was really skeptical of this crypto thing, but then this super cool project that's building in my district came and talked to me. And like, I didn't even know it was like that kind of whatever cool thing it was. And probably not NFTs, but something along those lines.
That makes sense. Okay, let's go back for a second. You were talking about how language matters, and specifically with regards to how we sort of name these things and how they
Yeah.
may oftentimes resemble, traditional financial instruments. What do you think has been the biggest disaster, if you had to name what has been like disastrous in terms of how we present these things?
Well, I think calling it DeFi at all is hard. And I started working with developers before we even called it DeFi. So, and for a while we tried calling it open finance, but
Yeah.
obviously that's being used in other contexts and things like that, like with open banking. But I really tried to say like, this is a communications system and not necessarily a financial system. And we know how this underlying infrastructure works in many ways and how to regulate it, because we do that in our traditional financial system, right? Like servers are used and thought of in a certain way for banks and stuff like that. And so I think that calling it a new financial system has in many ways hurt us. Now, it's also, I would say DeFi is maybe the coolest thing that has actually come out of crypto. We haven't, I think, seen or realized its full potential yet for a variety of different reasons. But yeah.
Well, what specifically about DeFi? Is it just like the decentralized aspect when we have maybe like some vectors of centralization, and then there's also a lot of the DeFi projects may resemble companies, or like is this like what you're mainly implying here when you say that DeFi is probably like not the word to use?
So yeah, I mean, look, we're calling it DeFi because it's. I don't think we're going to change that now.
Yeah.
But I do think that saying, well, this is a new financial system, but it doesn't. It's not the same as the old one, and so we don't have to abide by those regulations, has been really confusing. And so I think there's that part of it. As to like how it operates, as to how all of these operate, sure, I think naming companies and naming protocols the exact same thing has been really confusing, especially for regulators, because people will say like, well, what do you mean that so and so labs doesn't run the so and so protocol? That's just a hard leap for people to make.
Yeah. What is a good well, now I'm just asking you to design a perfect regulatory system, but what do you think is a like maybe I actually will do precisely that. Like what is the regulation that you'd really like to see, and what do you think is reasonable for this industry? And you can go whatever direction with that, DeFi, like wherever in crypto, but like what do you think is like the most important in your mind right now?
Sure. Well, let's do a few pieces of it because I think there are a lot of pieces. Obviously, people care deeply about token classification. In 2015, the CFTC issued this enforcement order and it said all crypto are commodities. So let's start with the premise that all crypto are commodities. So then you say, well, fine, but when do you treat transactions in crypto as securities, right? You do it when it's part of a capital raising form, like part of capital raising or capital formation. One, fine, you're using it, you're selling token warrants, right? Or SAFs, although hopefully no one's doing it in the US anymore, or whatever. You also, though, the thing that I think we haven't talked about out loud as much is like, there are other types of capital formation going on where you're doing market maker agreements, or you're selling monthly OTC, right? Your tokens to have capital to run your business, or you have listing agreements with exchanges. That's in some ways same type of activity. Your eyes just got really wide when I said that, but look, those are real things going on in the space, and that is in some ways either propping up token price or part of capital formation. So those types of activities should probably also fall under it when you're having those types of. But what does it mean? Does it mean what do you like? That's still the answer I don't have, and the SEC has certainly never given. Is like, what do you register? Right? If you're selling token warrants or SAFs, fine, you can register the warrants. But like when you have an OTC deal, Are you registering your OTC agreement? So you still need something new, right? We need a disclosure regime that actually makes sense. So I think that's the first part on tokens. I'm not going to go too far down the path on what we should do with centralized actors, but I think it's dicey because you don't have spot market regulation in the United States under the CFTC. So you probably have to create a regime to do that. And can you have these centralized exchanges dual register to be able to sell certain tokens or have transactions in certain tokens that are securities? Sure. And then also be selling commodities? Fine. And then with DeFi, where we are right now on the studying part is where everybody else in the globe is too. Nobody knows what to do from a comprehensive regulatory regime with DeFi. And I think that's right. And I think, look, DeFi is a small part of crypto, not just of the entire economy. I think it's like 0.3% in terms of TVL versus global GDP. So it's not taking down or the entire financial system or systemically important in any way yet. So I think we have time to figure out what to do. And I think that the regulators that I've spoken to who really get it and who have studied this say, yeah, it's much harder than it looks when you're thinking about DeFi. You can't just import the old system straight onto it. So like, I think we're pretty much in a good place, except for the fact that people, I think, still are trying to import all sorts of new things around tokens and figuring out securities and decentralization on tokens and stuff like that.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Yeah, what do you think is the long run of tokens? Do these, maybe I'll rephrase this a little bit. Do you see tokens in the long run acting like true bearer instruments or, like outside? No, okay, go ahead.
Well, not all of them, right? Like we have there are 20,000, 30,000 tokens now. I don't think so. And I think the ones that will be few and far between, right? Like is RWA is going to really take off and be these types of bearer assets and things like that? No. I mean, will we have tokenized real world assets? Maybe. That's obviously happening and important, but yeah, I don't know if that's the next thing. So no, I don't see them as being huge bearer assets, but I do see them as being important to the functioning and security of networks. And I think that I was at a conference a little while ago and I said, we're actually not going to be able to meet the full vision of decentralization until we stop caring about token price.
What do you mean by that? What, elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are so focused on like token go up, right? Speculation on assets. I think that there has been such high highs in this industry with ICOs, with DeFi summer, bull markets, things like that. And people keep looking for, when is it happening again? When is it happening again? Because it felt great, right? Like you're getting these dopamine hits and it feels really good. And so people keep looking for that. And what we actually should be doing is focusing on the use cases we know work. Stablecoins, killer use case. Like we don't have to look for the killer use case anymore. Payments may not be the sexiest answer when it comes to crypto, but stablecoins are pretty amazing and the US government uses them too. Where do we want to plug in on DeFi? Not caring about what token price is, that may be really important. I already know that there are traditional financial institutions looking into that very seriously because it does offer benefits. But when you're just focused on tokens, you're building things that has like cyclical yield and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's not something that likely acts as a truly decentralized bearer asset in the long run, more than likely. Yeah.
No, and you need somebody doing something to make that happen. Right? People are not like doing it and stepping it away and being like, oh, hope the yield mechanism works, right? You have people who are involved. And that's okay. But we should just answer ourselves honestly about like when you need somebody involved and what does that mean versus when you don't.
So then where, in your opinion, is the big unlock in terms of using crypto if a lot of these are going to still resemble, if not specifically named securities, they're going to resemble securities in many ways. Where do you see the big massive unlocks? Like why are institutions interested in bringing equities on chain then?
So tell me, what do you mean by these look like securities.
I guess what I'm saying is like if we're in agreement that these aren't going to be just transferable around the world without any KYC or any like regulation around them. Go ahead.
I don't know if I think you need KYC to transfer tokens.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Like I sort of thought that was the implication. Like, will you need if there's like somebody, like you said, somebody needs to be involved. Okay. Will we, with tokens where somebody needs to be involved in some capacity in the protocol or the project or whatever, is there going to need to be KYC then to transfer these around on the grounds that there's like a fiduciary duty or whatever, like some, I don't know, maybe higher level like principal agent problem where the person running this protocol is in fact like in some way contributing to I don't want to say common enterprise, but something like that, and therefore they like on the reporting side, even for them, like this is typically how traditional securities work, to my understanding. Like you can't own an Apple share, an Amazon share without some KYC. Like, is this going to be the same with tokens? Would you imagine?
Oh, I see. So look, I was just listening to you and I was like, this is where all the regulation stuff goes so far down the hole because there are so many different pieces to it. And we're importing all sorts of different things from TradFi into the system. So I think there are a couple of things. When I was saying, oh, there may not be decentralization in a system, I was talking about like a protocol, right? Where somebody's holding an admin key and you need to do it and they're doing the marketing and they're doing this and they're coming up with partnerships and they're, I don't know, integrating other actors or other protocols and things like that. Tokens can be fully independent in some ways. Like a governance token may be in a fully different system and just govern, changes and things like that. So I think we have to be really specific and narrow when we're talking about various different types of regulation and how it's going to apply to all the different pieces of the industry. It's why nobody can ever agree in this space, right? Because a lot of it just collapses in on each other. Yes, you're right about securities. Like I have to go through a broker, right? If I'm retail and I want to buy stock, and my broker does have to do KYC. So yes, you're right about that. But for transferring tokens, it's hard to think about putting the genie back in the bottle. Yeah, right. And when the EU was thinking about the AML regulations that were complementary to MiCA, they thought about putting lots of restrictions around self-hosted wallets, and people really rallied against them for the time being to not impose all these KYC restrictions on self-hosted wallets. So we're far away from, on the permissionless side, having pretty, I would say, overarching regulation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I want to go back to stablecoins for a second. What is the most like recent regulation and I don't know proposals around stablecoins? Like where are we at around stablecoins?
Yeah, so in Europe, the Markets and Crypto Asset Regulation (MiCA) does regulate stablecoins. They have something called e-money tokens, which is what most stablecoins are. They also have another category called asset reference tokens, which reference another asset. So probably what we think of more like RWAs. And then they have utility tokens, which actually like give you access to things. So not how we call like governance tokens, utility tokens, or how we would even think of like proof of stake or tokens as utility tokens, but like true utility. And there's a different regulatory regime for what you have to do. You have very serious and stringent reserve requirements in Europe if you want to be a stablecoin issuer there. And especially if you're a non-euro backed stablecoin issuer, you have the most stringent regulations because I think they were looking towards the digital euro and trying to protect the pathway for that. So that's what you really have in Europe, stablecoin regulation wise. And then you have a few drafts in the US. You have the McHenry-Waters bill, you have the Hagerty bill. And so that's out there. That may actually come way before we have market structure in the US. And that would put us on par or certainly very close to on par with what's going on in Europe. And, we can say people want to build here, like in the US. There are a lot of builders here. And so people, I think that would be a big step forward to have stablecoin regulation for sure. I mean, there are lawyers who tell founders to just move offshore. Like you have no certainty, so you just have to move. And people are doing it.
Yeah, what does the, like we were talking about some of these proposals currently, what do they look like from the user perspective? Like, is there any changes in terms of, I don't know, sending USDC or USDT around, like from the user side, not so much from the issuer or like proof of reserve side, but like for me, for example, in a wallet, would there be any changes really? Yeah.
Hard to know because once in the US, you have to start registering. I haven't done the full analysis of what it's going to be like when these stablecoins go back out into DeFi, but it'll be very similar. And a lot of the stablecoin issuers today will only take like sophisticated investors or HNW or things like that, and not retail. There are still others who will continue to take retail, but you're still going to have to do the full KYC. It may be more stringent than it was before. And the thing I worry about is that there's going to be this whole on-chain tracing mechanism that may make it more difficult to transact with stablecoin issuers directly. I don't think that will necessarily come directly from regulation, but it may be a byproduct of it. Like if someone just funded me directly from Tornado and I want to go, like, I don't know if Circle would redeem me, even if they had my full KYC. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, but that could be
Yeah, that is concerning. And then that I think is like a lot of, especially for the more privacy focused people, like the big concern is it just ends up looking like back to Venmo or Cash App or something like that. Like we haven't really made tremendous progress there. But do you think that in general, what is your vibe? Just like level with me. What is the vibe in terms of like, do you think that the US appears to want to push stable coins to the private market versus like maybe more concerning talks of CBDCs? It seems like that is the direction we're headed, but also, I mean, I get my news all from Twitter, so like obviously I don't have like a viable perspective. So I'm curious if like you generally agree with that statement.
Yeah, the vibe I would say generally is private stablecoins in the United States for sure. I think we are very, very far away from a CBDC, and I certainly hope we are in the US. I think it just will be very hard from a privacy perspective. I think in Europe and Asia, they are a little more CBDC curious than we are here in the US. But I still think it's going to be very hard to get CBDCs at a retail level. Like, I mean, there are certain governments that have been looking into it for 5 or 6 years and don't even have a pilot program. Like CBDCs, the privacy aspect like you're talking about is the most challenging part. And I don't think anybody knows. I was just on with a big foreign regulator today who said like, oh, maybe ZKP is the antidote or the answer to privacy with CBDCs. And I was like, well, I don't know, but maybe. But at least, people are trying to innovate around it.
It seems like Americans, we have a deep sense of patriotism against that, I would say, as a general statement. Like, I think that a lot of Americans would just, I do think even though it's maybe like a small talking point right now and outside of crypto, not many people really have a strong perspective, but like when it has come up, you see people like really fired up against this. So I have some confidence that the United States is probably, at least for some period of time, immune to these draconian forces.
Vibes low on CBDCs in the US.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear. Okay. What about the current fund? Well, you sort of touched on this, but I want to ask in terms of how VCs operate, how capital is formed, where are we headed? What have we done wrong? You mentioned like, again, you've talked about like how we kind of have created the narrative for ourselves. What have we done like horribly wrong, and where are we headed with sort of like VCs and early investors and just like how this whole thing works?
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus on tokens alone from a VC perspective, while a great innovation, right? Like, I think we can agree tokens are actually a pretty cool innovation in many ways, very different than traditional startup world and things like that. But I think the hype around tokens isn't only at the retail level, it's also at the VC level. And so when you're focused on that, you may not always be focused on like, what are we building too? Or what are our portcos building and in what way? And, oh, maybe we have a traditional VC path here. It's 10 years till they have something cool and it makes sense to launch a token, right? I think there's a lot more immediacy in this space than in traditional VC.
Yeah, and I mean, like, this has always been kind of my reservations around them, and this is nothing novel. Like, a lot of people say this, obviously, but if you have like some kind of guaranteed liquidity, and also investors that, got access to this at very, very favorable prices. This is in many ways counter to, I think, what a lot of us assumed was the purpose of this space. Do you see any, where do you see this headed in terms of like ICOs were sort of banned. Now we're in these like high FTV, low float, this whole kind of charade. And it seems like there's been some social pushback on this. But what is like in your mind, and maybe you don't even have to come at this from the regulatory perspective, you can just give your own personal opinion. Like what is the direction we should be headed here?
I mean, I counsel a lot of clients or people in this space generally, and it's like, if you don't need a token, don't do it. Like, you can just sell equity. It's okay to just sell equity. People do it all the time. And I'll talk to people they're like, yeah. And then there'll be a staking mechanism. I'm like, oh, are you building a staking mechanism? They're like, oh, no. And I'm like, okay, but then the token has to be staked somewhere to like get something around it, right? So there's just a lot of like catchphrases, and you've seen it all the time and tweet about it, but like, it's cyclical too. Like, everybody's into staking. Okay, now the next thing everybody's into like, and so there's a lot of follow on around that. And I think it's just like, what are you contributing, right? Like, fine, plenty of traditional venture-backed firms failed, but the ones that have come up with a great idea haven't, and they've been successful. So look, in fairness to the rest of the industry, regulatory in the US has been so awful, tokens aside, that it has been hard to think only about building something useful. When you have people telling you like, oh, you need to move offshore, or when you tell people like, you have to put aside X million of whatever you raised for regulatory, right? Like, that's also pretty atypical for venture-backed companies. And so it has been like a perfect storm to make things very difficult to build something useful, right? This hyper focus on tokens plus the crazy lash out or backlash on regulatory has made it like really challenging. It's actually kind of like amazing we've made it this far. If you think about everything, all the hills that crypto in general has had to climb. And I described us as like a hydra the other day. I'm like, yeah, you cut off one hand and then like we come back even more. So, it's for sure like this here to stay narrative now is real.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned something earlier about it's going to be difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. And
yeah,
like, ironically, I see this with meme coins now. Like, you cannot prevent this. You will never be able to prevent this. And as long as somebody has an internet connection, they can form capital. I'm saying that like very generously, obviously, like they can launch a shitcoin on pump.fun, and it seems like virtually impossible to stop this now. But do you think that regulators see that yet? Like, do they understand that? Yeah, this is like what I have the sponsor of my show, like a good friend, Eugene, like he describes this as like a vampire attack on finance. And I think that is, in terms of how I see like the whole spectrum of decentralization, it's like, I'm like sometimes more convinced than other times. But one thing I definitely agree with him on is like it's like a Sybil attack. Like it's going to be almost impossible for them to prevent. I don't know the extent to which they realize that yet. Part of it is because nothing really that useful in terms of like, coming at Goldman or coming at JP Morgan has really transpired yet. But like, we can just keep launching coins for like eternity. And so I do wonder if like there's any like recognition of this yet.
So a great question. Eugene from Ellipsis, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's awesome. So yes and no. They don't realize that like, oh, if you have like front end regulation in the US, well, somebody in some other country can just like keep spinning up front ends like endlessly, right? And may not fall under regulation. You may never find them, they may be. So I don't think there's a recognition that that's going to happen. I think people think it's going to remain kind of orderly, but deep down, the reason that there has been such strong reaction to crypto, not just in the US, but everywhere, is that there's an understanding that it is some sort of vampire attack. And people don't think about it like that, but I will vividly remember being in Europe around ETHCC maybe 3 or 4 years ago and talked to a big international regulator who had put out some guidance or something. And I said, like, why was the guidance or why was this proposal so stringent? And he was like, because I'm balancing between like member states who are really interested in innovation and member states who think that they have power through state-backed fiat currency. And if you do not have the power of state-backed fiat currency anymore, people are worried that the governments will no longer have any power. Right. So like there's a deep-seated understanding of that. I think if you asked like Gary Gensler, is that what he thinks? No. But like I think deep down, people have that somewhere in the back of their mind.
What is Gary Gensler's like whole shtick? Like just I know people talk about this all the time, but I just like want to hear your perspective. What's his deal?
So I don't have any direct or personal experience. So I'll talk like anecdotally what I know or hear or whatever. He's a political actor. I think much of this was a political move. I think that he's not wrong, by the way. There's plenty of like scammers in this space. That's just not who he's going after. And so I do think that also he was trying to set himself up for something in the next administration and aligning himself at the time with what Elizabeth Warren thought or felt about crypto, which by the way, she seems to have like not pulled back completely, but she seems to have backed off of it a little bit, right? Like recently she's been like, I don't care if people hold crypto. I just don't want bad things to happen with it. I was like, that's new from her. So I think it was all very politically motivated because you can see, and everyone's documented it, including Coinbase and others, like there's a shift maybe 6 to 9 months into his tenure. And then he's just been so aggressive the whole time. So it seems like it was a very calculated political move.
What do you think happens if Uniswap turns the fee switch on? And the reason I ask is because a lot of times there's this understanding like, oh, like straight to jail. But really, I mean, the Tornado Cash incident, obviously, I think is very concerning. And like a lot of the privacy stuff is like very, very concerning for a lot of us. Yeah. With that said, though, like DeFi founders, they do get yelled at. But a lot of times, like, I mean, I don't think Hayden's going to jail, right? So, like, what happens if we just, like, keep, like, oh, we're going to turn the fee switch on, right? Like, they're going to come after us anyways. So why don't we just, like, go ahead and make this, like, yield-bearing asset or something?
Yeah, I mean, they're already coming after Uniswap. They publicized.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with the fee switch or not. But look, I actually think, and I'm hopeful, so fingers crossed, that, we're recording on October 29th. So we're a week out from the election. Like, things are going to look different. And then not only depending on who wins, by the way, they're going to look different regardless after this election. They may look different in different ways depending on who wins, clearly. And the markets may have different reactions to them. But we're not going to be in the same super draconian anti-tech world that we've been in for the last 4-ish years. And that's been, I think, really hard and really unproductive for the industry as a whole. So I'll go there. As for like DeFi founders, like right to jail right away. No, unless you are knowingly building something to commit crimes, right? Yeah. Like, I think there has to be a mental state part of this. And the Tornado Cash stuff is so bad for so many reasons. But the one thing is Tornado Cash wasn't designated the day it came into the world, right? There was a buildup over time of repeated usage by DPRK of Tornado Cash. Doesn't make it okay to designate, code as a sanctioned entity. So I don't agree at all, but I just want people to remember, like, it's not like you're going to wake up one day and then because you built a privacy protocol and be like taken away in handcuffs, right? There's something that actually has to be done and used and affirmative steps taken. And there are ways, plenty of people building great privacy preserving technology who I would say are certainly not going right to jail right away. So I think really problematic on the sanction side and on the DOJ side. But like if a bank had 40% usage by DPRK, that would get designated too. Does not make it okay because this is software. So like not saying that at all. I'm just saying like I want people to know that like you can build privacy preserving technology and not go to jail.
I don't know how much like you really work on this side, but I'm sure you have at least some perspective. What do you think about the role of validators with regards to, validating OFAC sanctioned transactions? Like, is this something that they can really clamp down on? I mean, obviously on Ethereum, we've seen, like OFAC list, but that still obviously these transactions are going through. Sometimes they're delayed, but like, what are your thoughts in terms of the role of validators or, people who actually mine on these chains?
This is, I think, the hardest question. Post Tornado Cash, Paradigm, along with a bunch of other people, put out a really strong paper on base layer neutrality and still exists today. And I'm a huge believer in base layer neutrality and keeping things set there. That being said, if you personally run a validator, you got to think, I mean, sanctions laws don't apply only to validators, by the way, they apply to everybody. And so regardless of what you're doing, if you're a business, you should make sure you're not like making payments to DPRK. So I think you just need to take your sanctions obligations seriously, is what I'd say.
In terms of the two candidates, I don't want to make you take a political side, but what do you see as the differences maybe between at least what you've observed? I mean, I think obviously crypto Twitter is generally of the opinion that Trump is going to be much more favorable, but obviously, like I said, it's hard to know what is, valuable from crypto Twitter. So I don't know if you have any perspective.
I do, but let's take the Trump himself out of it. Obviously he's fascinated by crypto these days, right? Notwithstanding where he was on his prior administration, but he actually has great people who are working on crypto policy on his team, or who will be. And so I think that will be really interesting. Senator Hagerty put out a new stablecoin bill, or draft bill for consideration, and really cares and has been thoughtful and has thoughtful staffers on the crypto side of things. So I think thinking about who he'd have as advisors on crypto is really important. I think a Bitcoin strategic reserve, I don't know. I'm not sure that's what the policy that's going to change everything. I actually do think Bitcoin's super important from a long-term perspective, including as a store of value. But, I'm not sure if what was said at Bitcoin Nashville is the stuff that's going to change everything in the crypto space. On the Harris side, I'd say she hasn't dabbled far down the road at all. I just don't think we know what she's going to do. I certainly don't think she's going to be as anti-tech as we've seen the last 4 years from the Biden administration, notwithstanding all of the executive orders we've seen that come out about AI and digital assets and things like that. The reality of what we've seen from the administration has been very different. But Vice President Harris has her roots in California. I think somebody she's very close to was very high up at Uber, maybe her brother-in-law. She has ties to the tech industry in many ways. So I don't think she's going to be in the same place necessarily as Trump and his advisors and team are. But I do think regardless of who wins, we'll see real crypto legislation in the next 3 years, probably.
I kind of asked this a little bit with the stablecoin bill, but what is the first piece of regulation you see, like encompassing regulation you see coming into fruition?
For this
industry. Stablecoins?
It's just not controversial, right? You have US dollars backing them. You need to have reserves. They're already highly regulated as MSBs and with money transmission licenses. So and people are pretty close, right? There are some differences on what people want on stablecoin regulation, but people are pretty close. And so it seems likely that we can bridge the gap on that.
Do you have any other thoughts? Do you have any other ideas just in terms of the election stuff? And then I was going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that all this election stuff has been good and bad for crypto. I think coming into the election and the amount of momentum that the industry has seen in terms of bringing this issue to the fore and everything that comes with it has been really good, right? The regulation by enforcement stuff has been highlighted in a new way that probably hasn't been focused upon before. And so I think it's brought a lot of good issues to the fore. I also think it's brought a lot of good people together to think about what we want to do for regulation and how we can achieve that. So that's also been really positive, but it's been really divisive, I think, as you've seen on Twitter. I think that people have thought about whether, as you asked, who's a better candidate for crypto? What are we going to do about it? I think it's really, really driven people and the industry to different sides. And not to be Pollyanna about it, but that is so not what crypto is about, right? Bitcoin, the whole point of it was we're not going down this government path. We don't need it because this is just peer-to-peer transfer. And so I think it's gotten a little far afield from what crypto was originally intended to be. Now, in some ways that's good. We're building cool new things. And maybe Satoshi would be psyched for meme coins, unclear. But yeah, I think there's been both good and bad from the election for sure.
Yeah, it seems like the obvious reason is because people think that one candidate is going to pump their bags and the other most likely won't pump their bags. So it's like relatively straightforward in the short term, I would say, like at least from the crypto Twitter side, right? The people who are more screeching versus the people who are actually, like yourself, working on this stuff on a daily basis. The a tremendous amount of funding for candidates this cycle has come from crypto. What are your thoughts on this? Like, I guess positive. I don't really know what it's being used for, but what are your thoughts on this?
It goes into what I was saying before, right? Like, it just, people see this as a real issue, and you got to give the people who raise these super PACs credit. This is how it all works in the US, whether we like it or not. It does not work this way in other jurisdictions, by the way, where you have these massive funding arms that, can push a topic or an issue. But I think it's been regardless of who they funded or whatever, it has made people sit up and think about okay, this is a real issue that I need to pay attention to now. And I think it's important. I mean, starting out doing this 7.5, 8 years ago, there is no way I would have thought this is where we'd be.
More on meme coins. Let's go.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to this topic on meme coins that you raised a little while ago, because the most interesting thing that I think, especially when you're talking about VCs, is you've seen a lot of VCs come out and say meme coins have no value. Right. And I've seen lots of reporters say meme coins have no value. And there is this, I think, big push against meme coins in the industry from a very particular group. And I actually have a contrary opinion to that, which is meme coins have a lot of value. Just like crypto, right? It's whatever you assign the value to be. And there is some fascination with it. And don't meme coins embody a lot of what, even if the VCs don't want to admit it, what they're talking about, which is speculation, fun, right? Interest, bringing, banking the unbanked, right? Like you said, anyone with an internet connection can just spin up a meme coin. And so I think we're importing these TradFi versions of value when we say meme coins are valueless. So that's my take, which is I think meme coins have real value and are real crypto, even though people really, really have strong opinions against them.
Yeah, and they're also the most extreme version of we can opt out. We can continue to opt out. As long as you have an internet connection, you can launch something of theoretical value, right? So, but one thing is though, that I'm actually kind of interested. I'm sure this seems so fringe. I'm sure that this isn't something that regulators are really paying too much attention to. At least not pump.fun, for example. But that's something where, I mean,
UK regulators may be paying attention to pump.fun.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. Yeah, because the one thing I was going to say is you can just commit pretty flagrant financial crime very, very easily. I watch. You can observe these are definitely flagrantly manipulated markets in some scenarios. That does not seem like something that is ever really going to be able to be stopped. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I hope we have a system where it is, right? I definitely don't want, and I think many people do not want crypto to be used for ill-gotten gains or other, nefarious purposes and things like that. Look, I think 5 to 10 years from now, things will look a little different for all these types of things. And the fact that you can watch it all on chain is going to be both for good and bad long term. But so that's where I am on that. And I hope it is mostly used for fun. I mean, the thing when people say well, meme coins are valueless, I'm but people like TikTok, and this is just like TikTok, right? It's the same type of it's the same. And people are well, are you making money on TikTok? I'm yeah, think about influencers who are making so much money on TikTok.
In terms of what your personal beliefs on in let's say self-sovereignty or preserving values of permissionlessness or decentralization, whatever it may be, what should we be most apprehensive of? like for example, if the only way to onboard on chain was KYC, that would be an example of something where I would be like, that's a little bit concerning in my opinion. What are the things in your mind that we have to draw kind of lines in the sand on if we want to keep any semblance of why we got into this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just can't have everything be permissioned, right? You need to have systems where things are first, well, two things. I would say the things you can't let go of are permissionlessness and things being non-custodial, right?
Yeah.
I think self-custody is the most important right that we should protect. Not just from like a financial aspect perspective, but like a data privacy perspective and like your own personal data. I think that is a great advantage of crypto that has also been overlooked on the what's going on the token side. But the owning your own data stuff is going to be important down the road. And if we take away self-custody or self-hosted wallets, I think that's going to be a problem, which is same why like I think digital ID needs to expand well beyond where we are today. Because if people are talking about like, oh, well, we're going to put like a token in your wallet that shows you've been KYC'd, I still don't think that fixes the entire problem.
Yeah, that seems right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just like thinking, what do you think in terms of privacy? Like, where do you see the lines being drawn there? Do regulators or does the government respect this? Just give me your privacy overview.
Outside the US, people understand that privacy is a right that you have today in all sorts of aspects. And a lot of people understand it in the US as well. I think there has been a lot of concern from the national security perspective that anonymity is antithetical to or harmful to privacy. And there's been this like bifurcating between like, well, you might have things be able to be private, but you can't have things be anonymous. And so I think that things will shift back a little bit for sure. I think that there's an understanding that privacy is an inherent right. So,
can you just, when you say shift back, you mean shift back toward the good direction?
Towards a direction that is less draconian. But look, we still have to deal with the current storm case, right? That's out there now, and that has implications for normal payment processors or others in the payment space in general. So there's a lot of work we have to do on the privacy front.
What is the prognosis for that Tornado Cash case, in your opinion? Positive, negative, neutral? You have
tough. Tough. It's going to a jury, and this is tough, right? The understanding what was built is going and making that seem pretty easy when there are national security concerns around it that can be probably talked about in front of a jury, or it's going to be a tough case.
In 5 or 10 years, what do you think are the big breakthroughs we've had? And this could come from the regulatory side or just crypto in general. Like, what do you think? Where do you see us in 5 or 10 years? What have we accomplished?
5 to 10 years, we'll definitely have some form of crypto regulation, and certainly a stablecoin bill. So that'll in the US, that'll be good. I don't know. I'm kind of bullish on whatever we're going to build. I think there's going to be some big unlock, which I think will be. I'm not sure if we know what it is yet, but I hope this sort of next cycle around, like let's say the next 4 or 5 years, are actually going to be a real focusing time for the industry. I think if we're not so afraid all the time, which I think people are, like I think builders in the space are afraid all the time, then we can sort of calm down and just focus on what we're actually building.
Yeah. I have another thing I wanted to ask. I don't know how much interaction you have with traditional financial firms, but do you think that banks, financial institutions, do you think they're afraid of us, or do you think that they want to work in tandem? It seems like it's the no? Go ahead. Let's hear it.
Eat our lunch. They are ready to flip the switches on when there is regulation.
That's
So
what I think too. Like this
I
is
know
my
it.
all right. I'm about to say something. Like this is my whole like thing is like when Uniswap and Aave and Maker all get regulation, so does Goldman and JP Morgan and Citadel, and they can just launch their thing. Yeah, this is why like it's like quite
I would do it
interesting.
even differently than that. Like forget Uniswap and Aave and Maker, put them to the side. When there is some form of framework around tokens, then everybody else is ready to go, and Coinbase will not be the biggest guy on the block
Yeah.
necessarily selling tokens, right? Like Robinhood flipped on a prediction market yesterday. Do you know what I mean? Like real institutions are ready to go on all of these things.
Yeah, that's why like it's interesting when people talk about like wanting regulatory clarity. I think this is a very reasonable ask, but also
Yeah.
this could be such a seismic shift for the
Yeah.
industry in terms of how it's laid out. And I've often thought this, it's like, like when we have regulatory clarity, so do all the people with like Saudi oil money and like Malaysian investment scam money. Like they're going to pile in. Like, so this has always been my perspective as well. It's interesting that you think they're like sidelined, ready to go. That's kind of what I have picked up as well.
Good. Sounds great.
Well, I think we covered a lot. Is there anything we didn't hit on? Is there anything you wanted to like?
No.
Feel free.
No.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Awesome. Well,
Thanks
thank you so much for. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. I thought it was great.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Sounds good.